Often the forgotten position in fantasy, but it is still hugely important to make sure you're selecting the correct tight end to help you win a fantasy title. We're going to run you through 6 tight ends that you need to be avoiding this year in redraft leagues. We're the Fantasy Sanctuary, and we're here to help you pick the right tight ends to win yourself a title. The first one, Tom, it feels like we've talked about him a few times this offseason. George Kittle, he had an incredible run down the stretch with Brock Purdy under center, but he was hugely touchdown reliant. He was more touchdown reliant than any other elite tight end has been in recent history. And I just think he's going to be too much of a, touchdown reliant option, boom bust option, because you can't bank on that volume week in, week out. Do you tend to agree?
Yeah, I think George Kittle's probably the heaviest flag plan that I've gone into this season with. Going against him and saying that I'm not drafting him at his cost of tight end for, I want Travis Kelce, I want Mark Andrews, and then I want Kyle Pitts, who's going after him. I want TJ Hawkinson at cost. But George Kittle, yeah, you touched on it. He had 11 touchdowns last year, which is a complete outlier when you look back over the course of his career. He'd never managed more than 6 before last year. And perhaps it is sticky. Perhaps Brock Purdy is just going to utilize George Kittle in a way that Jimmy G never did. But that touchdown rate, which you talked about, he had the highest touchdown rate of any tight end who saw over 50 targets. In the 8 games with no touchdowns, he had 4.9 half PPR points per game. In best ball, you might be able to overcome that. In redraft, that is an absolute brutal hit to be taking from a tight end that you're paying a premium pick for. And Kittle, he dominated against opponents who struggle again to defend against tight ends. I write a DFS matchup column every week. And last year, 2 teams who you always started looking at the tight end position with were who was playing the Seahawks and who was playing the Cardinals, because they just couldn't defend the position. George Kittle scored 6 touchdowns against them across 3 games. So there's all that. And then you have to consider the fact that when Deebo Samuel wasn't there, when George Kittle was going off, when Samuel was playing, George Kittle's points per game was 9.14 half PPR points per game. In the games that Samuel missed, it jumped double that to 18 per game. So you can look at all the splits. You can say when everyone was healthy, it was Deebo Samuel was the first target. It was then Ayuk after that, and it was CMC, and then it was George Kittle as 4th choice. And it's incredibly difficult for me to build anything in terms of a case for George Kittle. We know he's got that elite ceiling, but so do some of the other tight ends who are available. And I'd much rather just wait a couple of rounds and take Kyle Pitts and bank on the ceiling outcomes there from a younger tight end instead.
And another tight end that sort of was slightly boom bust. We saw that incredible rookie season in 2017. He then disappeared into fantasy wasteland for 3 or 4 years before booming back in a massive way, finishing as the tight end 8. But another offense that there's more mouths to feed. We talked about Calvin Ridley coming into this offense throughout the offseason. He is a true number 1 receiver that's going to command north of 25% target share. Well, Evan Engram last year only saw 17% target share, and yet had a really efficient season because he saw some decent usage around the goal line and was used in inventive ways. Can we rely on that yet again when there's another massive mouth to feed that's just been plopped in this offense?
I don't think we can. I mean, Ingram did fantastic washing away like the stench of Jason Garrett and Joe Judge from his time with the Giants. But it wasn't like he just hit the ground running in week 1 and was really fantasy viable consistently. He had 42 targets between weeks 13 and 17, which was only behind Hawkinson and Kelce. And that was the point where he turned into a real league winner. But it wasn't that way for the whole season. I think it's tricky because there's a clear upside with Evan Engram. Like last year, he was the only tight end drafted out of the top 100 spots in ADP who had a 100-yard receiving game. And that is all league-winning stuff, and he deserves to be a top 12 tight end. But tight end 8 doesn't feel good to me. I mean, he only had 3 games over 15 PPR points, and I think there's still the difference between Engram and the real elite tight ends, or even like Kyle Pitts, who we're still at, I'm giving a level of projection to, that's quite a substantial difference. But meanwhile, Engram, he's right around the area of kind of players like David Njoku, Pat Frymouth. I think it's easier for me to see them outperforming him this year than it is for Engram to have another real fantastic season.
Yeah, I think I can kind of get on board with Evan Engram around his cost, because I think there is a world where this offense takes a step forward. I really believe in Trevor Lawrence taking that massive jump, and I think that there's going to be more scoring opportunities. But this is a guy that had a great year last year, but was 13th in target share at the tight end position. And we're saying that he's probably going to see a slight reduction in terms of target share because Calvin Ridley's been dropped in. So, yeah, there's plenty of those guys. And I think there's maybe even some guys going after him that I'd probably prefer. Definitely Pat Frymouth over him straight up. Another guy that I just can't get on board with, I think the cost is absolutely mind-blowing. Dalton Kincaid. Is he a guy that you're dabbling in, you're dropping some shares in best ball, or are you just avoiding completely?
Very rarely. Occasionally, if I've got Josh Allen, then you have to buy into the idea that his passing game is going to be explosive. But Dalton Kincaid's being drafted as the second highest rookie tight end over the last few years, only behind Kyle Pitts. Like, it's really unusual for a rookie tight end to be drafted as high as Kincaid is. And all the talk is that they're going to use him more as a slot receiver than a true tight end. And perhaps if they completely ignore the tight end position, that becomes something that happens. But you look back at the stats with rookie tight ends over the past 2 decades to the turn of the millennium, like 384 tight ends have played in the NFL in their rookie season and recorded some form of a stat. Of those 384, only 2 of them averaged 10.0 points for their rookie season. And then if you want to specify more, like rounds 1 to 3, where we're typically more interested in players with that good draft capital, 106 tight ends fall into that category. 25% of them failed to exceed even 1.9 half PPR points per game. 56% failed to put an average of 4.0 on the board. And basically only 20% of rookie tight ends managed to average over 6.0 half PPR points in their rookie season. And for me, I look at the number of white tight ends who are veterans who consistently do that. Dalton Kincaid, if you've got deep benches, that's fine. Stash Dalton Kincaid, and perhaps down the stretch he's coming up great for you. But Dalton Kincaid is not a week 1 starter.
I think that's it for me, is that, yeah, in best ball, I get it, because you can attack the position with volume and you can kind of get by. In Dynasty, I get it. I think in 2-3 years, Kincaid's going to be fantastic. But for redraft, I just can't see a world where he is a startable option until, at best, we're talking week 7, week 8. I think he's going to take some time to get up and running. And that's a best case scenario. So there's no world in which, in a redraft league, I'm carrying a tight end 6-7 weeks on my bench once we start getting into bye weeks, just for the potential upside. I'd much rather go and buy someone else, draft someone else, and if needs be, I'll trade for Dalton Kincaid halfway through the year once he starts getting on the field and actually producing. Another guy that I just cannot get my head around. Another year where he doesn't produce, and yet Irv Smith is being hyped up as another tight end that we should be drafting. Tom, please, can you talk some sense into me? I have never understood the Irv Smith hype, and yet tight end 18 in ADP. This is just wild.
It's absolutely bananas, because people are just looking at, okay, Irv Smith is with the Bengals. Well, that's great, but the Bengals just don't target the tight end position. You look at what Hayden Hurst was doing there, and yeah, in 2022, Joe Burrow targeted tight ends 94 times, which is the 9th lowest amount of any offense in the league. Hayden Hurst, he averaged 7.1 PPR points in games without a touchdown and had only 2 touchdowns all season. 2/3 of Hurst's games resulted in single-digit fantasy returns. So now you're going to tell me that Irv Smith, a player that's never been able to earn targets on an offense, is suddenly become fantasy relevant. We saw what happened with the Vikings last year when they got TJ Hawkinson in there, an actual good NFL player. They were able to really utilize him, and they targeted him at at a level consistent with Travis Kelce. But Irv Smith, you go back through the years, he ranked 58th in targets per route run in 2019, 59th in 2020. Irv Smith is not a good football player. We've seen him drop balls. We've seen him unable to command targets. And if you are thinking that just because he is now a member of the Bengals, that he's suddenly become fantasy relevant, then I'm sorry, but that's just not happening this year.
I honestly have never got my head around the Irv Smith hype, and I cannot get my head around him being on the Bengals. In what world are you ever feeling comfortable clicking next to his name to start on a week in, week out basis? He's at the very best, the fifth choice in this option, and you're praying for a touchdown. Well, there's plenty of other tight ends that I'd think have got a much higher chance of scoring a touchdown than Irv Smith. So, yeah, I can't get on board at tight end 30 prices, let alone tight end 18. This is the next guy I think we kind of slightly disagree on here, Tom. So I'll let you go first. Cole Kmet, obviously an interesting pass offense, should we say that, in terms of Chicago? Is that interesting volume the reason why you're fading him?
No, it's because I just don't think Cole Kmet is particularly going to be... Cole Kmet had every opportunity to be fantasy relevant last year. There was no competition for targets last year. There was a bunch of IKEA sales staff playing for wide receiver for the Bears. It was just... There were irrelevant players left, right, and center. And Cole Kmet should have been able to do better than he did. Last year, he had 8 finishes outside the top 20 of the position, and he scored less than 10 PPR points in 75% of his appearances. He had a 2-week spell that massively inflated his numbers with 45 points over the two of them. But the problem with that is you weren't starting Kmet for at least one of those games because, the first game that in that streak, he scored 16.8 PPR points. Sorry. The first of those games, you weren't starting him when he went off because of the 3 weeks before that, he'd scored a combined 16.8 PPR points. So, and then when he did go off, did you have enough faith in him to suddenly start him the week after that? Was it like, okay, the breakout's here? Or was it like, okay, well, looking back over the last 4 weeks, this is the only week where he's actually been relevant, so I don't know if I can start him again. He had a 19.3% target share, which was the 7th highest amongst all tight ends. But his yards per route run of 1.2 was 43rd amongst all tight ends. He wasn't able to turn targets into production, and now DJ Moore's going to be there. Yes, we've added Robert Tonyan as well, which I'm not saying Robert Tonyan's suddenly going to become this pass-catching god of a tight end, but it's somebody else who's going to play snaps, which is meaningful. And even if the Bears see an increase from 12.8 pass completions per game, I don't think it's going to be to the point where we're ever consistently sustaining anyone outside of DJ Moore this year.
I think this is where we disagree, because I look at those numbers in terms of low yards per route run and a crazy high target share and think, well, if Chicago last year had a insanely low pass attempts per game rate of 22.2, the league average is at 33. Like, if they regress slightly towards the league average, there's going to be more volume. He produced okay in terms of the raw target numbers that he got. The problem is that there wasn't enough pass attempts to go around. Now, the Bears have just paid him significant money. I think that they're investing in him longer term. Yeah, I'm not drafting Cole Kmet and expecting him to be a great tight end. But I think that in the range that he's going at tight end at 19, I think this offense is going to take a step forward. I think this offense is going to be more pass happy. And therefore, if Cole Kmet can continue to carve out the volume that he did last year, that's only going to make him more fantasy relevant. This is a guy that is a big body. We know that he is useful in and around the red zone. Yet, hopefully, we can see a higher number of pass attempts that means he can be fantasy relevant. So yeah, I completely get not attacking him as a top 12 tight end, but a tight end 19, that's a guy that I can get on board with and say, you know what, there's a range of outcomes where Justin Fields takes that step forward as a passer and this offense takes a step forward. And I think Cole Kmet's going to be brought along for the ride if that does happen.
And I'll be happy to watch you play that out.
The next guy we're talking about, it feels like he was getting overhyped. He was the tight end darling of the offseason. And then DeAndre Hopkins signed, and suddenly everyone couldn't jump off the ship quickly enough. It's Chigoziem Okonkwo. Are you a believer? Or are you thinking that this is just another option on the Titans offense that we just don't want?
I don't think I feel quite as strongly about Chigoziem Okonkwo as you do, Rich. I think you're more out on him than I am. I mean, the Titans, they targeted the tight end position at the 12th highest rating last year, and under Ryan Tannehill, plenty of tight ends have been fantasy relevant. So I do kind of lean into that slightly at times. And it's, it is definitely harder to get on board with it now we've added DeAndre Hopkins. Before DeAndre Hopkins was there, I think I was more in at cost because I think it was very easy to look around and go, okay, well, he's only competing with Treylon Burks and Nick Westbrook-Ikine for targets. DeAndre Hopkins is absolutely a volume hog. And even though Chiggy, down the stretch between weeks 12 to 17 last year, he had 2.5 yards per route run, which was the third highest among all pass catchers, not just tight ends, with, all players with 10 catches or more. I think he's an incredibly athletic player, but I just don't think that this offense is going to be able to sustain even 2 pass catchers, because I think the offensive line is going to absolutely stink. I think Ryan Tannehill is probably going to be in and out of the lineup. I think we've got a very difficult start to this season. It wouldn't surprise me if we see a quarterback change earlier than possibly some other people do think. And yeah, I don't mind taking shots on Chiggy in best ball because I think he has the kind of ceiling which certain tight ends don't have. But it's a very difficult sell for redraft for a team that will possibly score an average of 18 to 20 points per week.
Yeah, I think for me, you touched on some of those advanced numbers, and it felt like all offseason, those advanced numbers were thrown down my throat because that's proof that he was going to be a superstar. That 2.5 yards per route run, 26% targets per route run. It's like, okay, that's great. The reason those numbers were so high, because he only ran a route on 36.5% of offensive passing plays. Like, if you're hardly on the field, yeah, your advanced numbers are going to look great because there's not the volume there to sustain it. Yeah, there is absolutely some talent there. There is potential that he could break out. But I just don't think that he is going to be consistently on the field enough to be able to be fantasy relevant consistently. Yes, there will be some spike weeks, and I get what you're saying about, in best ball, that's fine. But in redraft, I want a guy that I can plug in, week out. The Titans' offensive line is the worst in the league by an absolute mile. They are going to need every single piece of help they can to block. They don't need a huge athletic freak of a tight end that can't block and needs to line up in the slot in order to function. They're going to need that prototypical 6th offensive lineman in order to protect the quarterback to be able to get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins and downfield. So I'm just worried that he's not going to be on the field enough, running enough routes to be consistently reliable week in, week out. And that's why, for me, he's an easy fade at current cost. And that concludes the 6 tight ends. Hopefully you're in agreement that you're going to avoid all 6 of them. If there's one that you firmly disagree with, one that you think that we've got wrong, let us know in the comments below. We reply to every single comment we receive. Also, while you're there, make sure you're hitting that thumbs up. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe, because there is plenty more content coming your way.